Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode I'm joined by co-host Greg Ramsey. From thrash metal to mainstream, rock and roll cowboys, the Four Horsemen, considered one of the best bands of all time, a legendary act that's still going strong today. We're talking about the one and only Metallica. Metallica is James Hetfield on lead vocals and guitar, Kirk Hammett on lead guitar, Robert Trujillo on bass, and Lars Ulrich on drums. Formed in 1981 in Los Angeles, they have a signature sound and style. Metallica is considered one of the founders of thrash metal alongside Anthrax, Slayer, and Megadeth. Dave Mustaine was famously fired from the band and formed Megadeth. Bassist Cliff Burton was tragically killed in 1986 and replaced by Jason Newsted, who played with the band during the most successful period from 1986 to 2001 and was replaced by Trujillo. Metallica has released 10 studio albums, 4 live albums, a cover album, 5 extended plays, 37 singles, and 39 music videos. They've been nominated for Grammys 23 times and won 9. Their last 6 studio albums, beginning with Metallica in 1991, also known as the Black Album, have consecutively debuted at number 1 on the Billboard 200. Metallica ranks as one of the most commercially successful bands of all time, having sold over 125 million albums worldwide as of 2018. Metallica has been listed as one of the greatest artists of all time by magazines such as Rolling Stone, which ranked them at number 61 on its 100 greatest artists of all time list. As of 2017, Metallica is the third best-selling music artist since Nielsen SoundScan began tracking sales in 1991, selling a total of 58 million albums in the United States. And that's the lowdown on Metallica. I love metal, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone that knows me. And I guess because I don't really advertise it too much. Not that there's a reason behind it, I just really don't. And when I say the word metal, I don't know if I would classify myself as a metalhead, because I don't know if I am. In other words, hey Tom, you're a metalhead, all right, man, let's talk about all these bands. I can talk to you about some of them, but I can't talk to you about all of them, because I'm really just, that's not me. I mean, I'm sort of an all-around music guy, with the exception of a few different various forms of music that I'm just not into. But I'm metal, I'm rock, I'm jazz, I'm the blues, a little bit of classical, and that's sort of my taste, But I do love metal. There's something about metal that speaks to me, and I think it's that typical, suburban white dude. I don't know why that metal speaks to us the way it does. And maybe that's an unfair assessment. Maybe metal speaks to whoever it wants to speak to, no matter what your background or race, creed, or color happens to be, or persuasion or gender or whatever. Maybe none of that really matters. Maybe you either dig it or you don't. But there's something about metal that speaks to me. It's the way it hits. I think is the best way to put it, is just the way it hits. Just that sound. Just that. I can't even mimic it. I can't describe it. And only a metal fan would know what you're talking about. But for me, that sound is Metallica. That's the best way to describe it. If someone said, tell me what you're talking about, I'd say, okay, you know how Metallica sounds? That's the sound. Just that hit when they're playing in unison, and it's the drum beat and it's the guitar and the bass at the same time, and they hit and they stop, right? That to me is metal, and that to me that's what speaks to me. When it comes to you, this stuff has been speaking to you for years, man. Because when you and I first met, I kind of knew you were a metalhead. It's not the first thing I learned about you, but it's one of the things that kind of came up in conversation after the fact. I don't know if you can even put this into words. Maybe it's an unfair question to kick off the show with, but what is it about metal that speaks to you? I mean, specifically Metallica, what is it about this band that speaks to you when you listen to it?
Well, I think they're a really down-to-earth band, and they're no BS, man. They just come at you full force, and they're not trying to, beat around the bush or anything. They're going to bludgeon you to death with their sound.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can just picture people's ears bleeding, during the concert here, and Metallica's up there just going at it, and they're maybe even getting a kick out of it. So, I mean, enter at your own risk when you go to a Metallica concert. They're loud, they're fast at times. Old school Metallica, it's no excuses, no apologies.
Right.
And they're just going to take no prisoners. And yeah, I just love the sound. It really resonated with me for, up to this day. I'm still an old school Metallica fan. And you talk about metal. I mean, the word metal is in the name of the band.
Right.
So, how much better can you get?
And they set themselves up right off the bat. There's no wondering what they are. If you heard the name of the band, you go, it must be a metal band because it's Metallica. I mean, what? There's no false advertising going on here, kids. You know what they are. How many times have you seen Metallica live, by the way?
Twice. 2 occasions I've been fortunate enough to, witness this band, this monster, live. Once with the long hair, and again
Right.
when they cut the hair off. Both times it was a rocking show, man. Everybody was up on their feet, hands pumping, the horns in the air. Man, it was a crazy, wild time, and I loved it.
Did you have good seats, or did it even matter?
We could have had better seats, but it didn't really matter. It was so loud, and we could still see the band on the stage. So I wasn't really down about that. I was just sitting there, rocking, headbanging, and I think that's where my neck problems began at that age. Headbanging so much, it's just, Metallica, what can I say, man? They're a thrash metal band, and, they changed their sound, when they grew up a little bit, and, I can't really fault them for that. It's, life's about change sometimes, and you can't stay the same. You've got to keep up with the times.
It reminds me of the scene from the movie where you have the main characters are comparing battle scars of fights they've been in and whatnot. But instead of that, it would be you saying, all right, I got this at a Rat concert, and this where a dude cut me with a bottle and went to see Slayer. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the stuff you're talking about right now. So
the second time I got to see Metallica, it was at what was then called Blockbuster Pavilion. It was an outdoor arena. Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains was, on solo tour at that time. He was there with Days of the New. And right before Metallica came on, the crowd was getting restless. We were sitting in the lawn seats, which wasn't really lawn. It was like the hard metal benches. But, and then the seats below us, for some reason, we were getting anxious and ready for the bands. Not us personally, my group of people, but the people were getting kind of rowdy and ready for the big ticket to come on and do their thing. So suddenly, all of a sudden, it's a plastic bottle war. I don't know how it started, but some idiot probably just threw one, and then next thing you know, it's an exchange. It's like bullets flying back and forth, and we're caught in the crossfire. And I remember my brother-in-law, right beside me saying, this is pissing me off. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, but what are we going to do about it? All you could do was shield yourself from and I'm thankful that they didn't hand out bottle beer, because that would have turned out bad. Yeah.
I was just getting ready to ask you if it was plastic or glass, but yeah, most live events don't hand out glass, and a lot of them won't even hand out the bottles anymore. They'll actually pour it in the cups because they don't want you to litter the place with plastic bottles or throw them. I guess you could say maybe they learned their lesson, right? But that's so. You mentioned Cantrell. Was this the Degradation Trip tour? Or was this the album before that?
It was Boggy Depot. Yeah, it was his first solo adventure after Alice in Chains had kind of, gone kaput for, a little while.
Right.
So, but it was great to see him on stage. He really rocked it too, man. I got to give that guy a lot of credit. He's very talented. I love him.
We've both been Cantrell fans for a while. We've both been Alice fans for a long time. And Cantrell has that sound. It's and I'm telling you folks, if you're not into metal, it's hard to describe it. And I'm not talking about the sound in terms of a song. I'm not talking about the sound in terms of the genre. I'm talking about that one hit. That one, as I said, the bass, drums, guitar coming together, bam, just that one note where you're like, oh, I love it. Cantrell has that. Alice had that. And Metallica, I don't know, man. I don't think anyone does it any better than they do. At the time when you started listening to metal, teenager, right? So what was it about Metallica that stood out from the rest? Because we're talking about hair metal. We're going way back here, folks. What was it about Metallica that stood out to you personally among all the other metal bands that you were into at the time?
Man, they just had a harder thrashing sound, and it really shook me up at the time because I wasn't accustomed to that. You know, I've been listening to bands like Motley Crue, Rat, Def Leppard, you know, stuff like that. And Metallica, man, they just hit me harder, and it really rocked me to my foundations. But it was a good kind of shaking up, if you know what I mean. And I remember my first encounter with this band. It came in the form of a video. You know, imagine that, Metallica doing a video
right.
for I think their first 3 albums, no videos at all. So this was my first exposure, and probably a lot of other people's exposure at the time to the band. And it was a perfect song to do a video for, one. And I know that they used the film Johnny Got His Gun, you know, to go along in with the song in the video. It's like they wrote the song for this movie, and they purchased the rights to the movie, you know, to avoid any kind of legal issues. And man, you know, those two things went together just perfect. You know, Metallica must have, you know, the guys must have been a fan of this movie and got together and wrote the song specifically for it. And yeah, I kept watching the video, and suddenly, you know, I was hooked, and I'm a Metallica fan. And let me just say that my high school picture, I had grown out some long hair. You know, it wasn't as cool as I'd hoped it. You know, looking back, it wasn't as cool as I thought it was. You know, I wished I'd never done it, but it was a phase I was going through at the time. I thought it was cool. I thought I was badass, like Metallica.
Right.
And, you know, I was sporting a Metallica Master of Puppets T-shirt. You know, who does that in their senior high school picture? You know, it's
right.
Kind of like something you'd think of being formal. But, you know, I wanted to be down to earth like Metallica, and I think, you know, that's just what I wanted.
I mean, to answer your question, I would assume a lot of kids did at that time. I went to high school with a lot of metal guys, a lot of metal heads, both in classes that I had and then friends that I had also. And dude, honestly, those were some of the best friends I had because they were fairly quiet. They were unassuming. They weren't like loud and boisterous. Not to say that metal fans are classified into one type. I think I kind of did that earlier without even knowing I did it. But from my experience anyway, how about that? From my experience, they were fairly quiet, seemed to be good kids, didn't really cause a lot of trouble, but they always had the metal shirts. They always had Metallica or Megadeth or Slayer, you know, Anthrax. And you talked about Metallica sounding different. We're talking about thrash metal now. This is far beyond hair metal. So the first time I saw these guys was on MTV, like it was for a lot of people. I'd heard the name, but I wasn't familiar with any of their work, if I'm being brutally honest about it. But to me, their videos is what got me listening. And the first time I saw them, I thought, well, they're a hair band. Look at them. But then I heard that hit. I heard that sound. I'm like, okay, maybe they're not hair metal after all, because wow, this is good. And they kind of reminded me of like a grittier version of Zeppelin, sort of more sped up and more raw and not as orchestrated. Like the thing about Zeppelin to me that sets them apart from every other band is that Zeppelin is very theatric, but it's not forced. I don't feel like it's a production. It is a production. Their stage show is a production in terms of, you know, Plant's got this way he moves. It's very Jim Morrison with Robert Plant, where it kind of feels like it's an actor playing the part of a lead singer, which I don't mean that in a negative way. It just kind of feels like he's, okay, I'm the lead singer. I have to move this way and I flip my hair this way and I hold the mic in this fashion. Very Jim Morrison with Plant. And the whole ensemble of Zeppelin, there wasn't like, you know, any craziness going on stage in terms of, there's a big gimmick here and there's a big blow up thing here or whatever. It's not like a Beastie Boys concert where there's, exaggerated things happening on stage. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just that feeling of, I didn't go see a rock concert. I went to see a play on stage. It's a rock and roll epic, which kind of is what Zeppelin was and still is in my mind. Metallica wasn't that. Like you said, Metallica was in your face, unapologetic, no regrets, no remorse, balls to the wall, 200 miles an hour. And if you weren't hanging on for dear life, you were going to fall by the wayside. They were just going to run over you.
Something else that really set them apart from the hair bands, traditional hair bands of the 80s, they didn't wear the spandex. They didn't tease their hair, no makeup.
Right.
It was just down-to-earth guys wearing pants and shirts. I remember Dave Mustaine talking about his short time with the band, and he made the comment, playing with some of these bands like Motley Crue and Rat, they didn't tease their hair up. It was down. He wanted to be like Robert Plant and Jimmy Page, when he was growing up. I think all of his friends did. They idolized these guys at the time. And he said you could either have your hair up, which is not cool, or down like Jimmy Page, thus cool. So that's another thing, the image that they were projecting.
Yeah, and I think that's whether you mean to or not. And honestly, I don't know if Metallica set out to say, well, we have to look raw, we have to look different. Maybe they did, who knows? Because it is a buyer's market in terms of selling CDs and selling tickets to concerts and selling merch. I mean, if the fans don't like what they see, they're not going to come. They're not going to spend their money, right? So I guess in some regard, maybe they did, but maybe it was just more or less a matter of these guys were just being themselves. These were guys who played together and loved the music and loved the sound and just kept going forward from there. So I think there's a little bit of a difference there. So I don't know how much of this was predetermined ahead of time, but dude, it seems like the perfect mix of, you have these guys, they're wearing the black, and they can play. And, dude, at the end of the day, no matter what anyone says about any band that they like or don't like, can that band play? And I've got respect for bands that maybe I'm not into. I don't like the sound. I don't care for the vocalist. I don't care for the genre. But I will give props where props are due in terms of, man, this band sounds really good together. Was it the sound that got you when you first started listening to these guys? Was it in terms of they sound good together, or was it the driving beat that hooked you? Was it the lyrics? Because Hetfield's screaming his head off in the beginning of this band, but he's got that delivery, man, that raw delivery that is sort of off-putting, or it can be, where you kind of feel like you want to listen to what he's saying, versus some other metal guys who were screaming so loud, or that death metal where they're real deep in their tones and you can't make out a word. You kind of want to listen to what Hetfield has to say, right?
Yeah, you talked about what was it that drew me to Metallica. I think it was all of the above, what you mentioned. The beat, the sound, the lyrics, the way Hetfield came across on the mic. It just, it really mesmerized me. And I've been a fan ever since. And at any time when I'm driving down the road, I've got a Metallica CD I can pop in and just, go back and revisit my teenage years. And another point to make, this is some good frustration music. If you're having a bad day, whatever, you can listen to Metallica and get your frustrations out, your anger at something, no matter what it is. Just as long as you don't take it too far and act upon it, you got to
right. Exercise
some self-control. And, Metallica, they were a party band. They weren't just out there, trying to make it in the business. They at the time, they were really partying it up. Hence the nickname that people dubbed them with, called Alcoholica. Yeah, and Hetfield will tell you at the time, they embraced that. They thought it was cool, so they just went with it. And Kirk Hammett, whom I share a birthday with, that's another connection for me in this band.
Right.
He made the comment that they didn't really think about what they were doing; they just did it at the time. And of course, there are consequences and repercussions. So this band, they went through some stuff, but that they really, the core members stuck together through the years, and that's what I respect and appreciate about this band.
And it's funny that in later years, those were the same issues that threatened to tear the band apart. Because, and dude, you and I talked about GNR, and we've talked about the grunge era and how excess and alcohol and drugs, they're great in the beginning, that it's part of the lifestyle. But if you want to have longevity, at some point you got to let that stuff go. And we'll get there. That's part of this episode, folks, is the journey, right? So, yeah, in the beginning, like you said, they identified with that and they embraced it. So in order to understand sort of where we are today, I think we need to take a look back at how this whole thing started. Metallica formed in LA, as we know, they're a Los Angeles band. Late 81 is when Lars Ulrich placed an advertisement in an LA newspaper called The Recycler. And his advert read, "Drummer looking for other metal musicians to jam with." So that started the whole thing. Hetfield showed up. Another guy showed up. The guy's name was Hugh Tanner from a band called Leather Charm. They showed up, and, this probably doesn't do justice to the story, but, history was made, I guess, because the friendship between Lars and James was formed sort of right off the bat. And Lars knew what he was doing. He had connections. He got things rolling for them. And the band name came from Lars's friend, who was brainstorming names for a fanzine and was considering Metal Mania or Metallica. After hearing the two names, Ulrich wanted Metallica for his band. So, dude, talk about things that just kind of come out of the blue. Like, I never knew the history of the name. But, man, to me, some of the coolest stuff, some of the most memorable, most historic things about these bands that we've talked about, they just kind of come from nowhere. Like, had he not heard the word Metallica, what name would he have decided on? Which, it could have been anything, I guess, but man, Metallica, the word itself, like I said before, if you didn't know what you were talking about, someone said the word Metallica, you'd go, well, it must be a heavy metal band, because that's the only thing that makes sense. Either that or it's like precious metals. It's like a field of geology or something, like the study of minerals or whatever. But, instead you've got this heavy metal icon of a band. Dude, that name just flat out sets them separate and makes them different from everybody around them. Not just the sound and the look, but the name as well. It's a complete package, right?
Yeah, you said it all, man. Hetfield answered an ad in the paper. It's kind of like guys who think alike. They have the same mindset. They get together and, it just gels. And from then on, the history is made. It's nice to, read about the beginnings here. We're one of the greatest bands ever came from, this little start in L.A. And then, of course, you had Dave Mustaine, one of the greatest guitarists in music history, to also answer the call. And, there for a while, you really almost had an all-star band from what happened years later. Dave going on, getting kicked out of the band and forming his own band, Megadeth. Probably not as successful as Metallica, nearly, but in my opinion, I think they're just as good. The sound, it's almost like Metallica too. I'm pretty sure that Dave probably wouldn't appreciate that, but
right.
He's a very respectable guy in this industry and very well spoken, and I got a lot of respect for him for what he's accomplished. And yeah, Metallica the same. A lot of respect. I really love both bands. I think they're almost like brothers, really.
And you mentioned Mustaine. You can't tell the Metallica story without talking about Dave Mustaine. As we know, as anyone knows who's a fan of this band, he was kicked out of Metallica. And it happened in 83. He was immediately replaced with Kirk Hammett. Actually, the same day he was replaced, which is wow. And I got a soft spot in my heart for Hammett. You know that because Joe Satriani taught him how to play. And I'm a massive Joe fan. I always have and always will be. The guy's just, he's a genius on the guitar. So in terms of Mustaine, I got to be honest with you. I respect his playing. I've never been much for his vocals. His voice is different, in my opinion. It reminds me of Rob Halford to a certain extent, which is, you can't really match Halford's shrieking the way he would deliver. It's great stuff. It's classic metal. So Mustaine kind of reminds me of that to some degree. But at the same time, there's something about his voice that I don't know. If I compare that next to Hetfield's, to me there's no comparison, because Hetfield has more of that guttural raw, just from the bowels of hell, lifting up. That's kind of what his delivery is in my ear anyway. But like you said, man, I've got mad respect for Mustaine as well. And talk about the problems that Metallica had. He had his own issues, and that's what got him kicked out of the band. So we saw very early on with this band that, okay, we party, we drink, we yada, 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 this, that, and the other, but you better keep it in check, because we got a job to do. We're trying to get a record deal. We want to record. We want to sell some records and go on tour. We want to be this band. So if you're not on board with that, you're kind of getting in our way, which is kind of what happened. I mean, I can't imagine how many conversations were had behind closed doors where it's like, dude, you got to stop. You need to ease up. There's time and place for this, and this is not it. Because reportedly he was getting violent, and it was just getting way out of control. He landed on his feet, which is good. But dude, in this industry, you're either going to be that party band, and that's how you'll end up, or you're going to be that party band that realizes, okay, now it's time to get down to business. And I think that's what Metallica did, especially when Mustaine was shown the door, right?
Yeah, he was out of control. I mean, Metallica, you could say the band as a whole was out of control at the time, but he was, even further than that. And Hetfield, in a documentary, said he was dragging the band down, so push came to shove, and they had to kick him out. I mean, I've read Dave Mustaine's book, his autobiography, Mustaine, and he says that Hetfield, kind of, saw him off. They'd really formed like a bond of friendship, and James had tears in his eyes as they were, saying their goodbyes. They got him a ticket on a bus, to go back to L.A. They were in New York at the time this happened. So, the switch was made. Kirk Hammett in place of Dave Mustaine. And ever since then, well, I can't say that. For several years after that, Dave was really bitter about being kicked out. And I think he took his frustrations out on Kirk Hammett, which, I don't know, that really wasn't fair to him, because he was just stepping into the band and trying to make a name for himself. Dave was very bitter, and it kind of became his calling card for years after that. He was fueled by this fire, and that fire led him to form the band Megadeth, and, history was made there. So it's kind of like another Metallica, but yeah, he definitely made his mark on the music industry as well.
Yeah, and like you said, it became his calling card. I like the way you put that. It became his calling card. That's what he was known for. He was the Bret Hart of metal at that time. It was like, oh, they did this to me, and oh, woe is me. And, at first you sympathize with a guy like that, but then after a while it's like, listen, do something, create something, put yourself back out there and move on. Because we like you, but God, enough's enough. And, we saw that, with Van Halen, of course, with Roth and Hagar, and we've seen it with other bands where guys get replaced. I mean, yeah, it makes for an uncomfortable situation for the diehard fans, but at the same time, to me, it's kind of like, do you support the player or do you support the team? What are you really backing here? So when your favorite player gets traded, you just stop pulling. I never understood these cats that, well, I'm no longer going to pull for the Knicks. Why? Well, because they traded so-and-so. So? Like, I don't get that. That doesn't make any sense to me. You're either a team fan or you're a player fan, right? So to me, it's kind of the same thing. But around this time, they get their record deal, and again, diehard fans are going to know this story. Kill 'Em All was not going to be called Kill 'Em All, which is a great freaking album name. It was initially going to be called Metal Up Your Ass, which is, wow, you could get away with that now, probably. I'm sure you could. But at the time, you had these distributors and the record labels saying, hold on, guys, we can't do that now. Bunch of stuffy white dudes, balding on top with their shirts and their ties. Listen here, guys, that's not what we're going to do. Which, I kind of get it. I mean, it was a good choice going with Kill 'Em All. But, man, talk about making a statement. No matter which title they chose, you knew up front this was going to be a different kind of band for a different era. And to me, I think Kill 'Em All started the era, the modern era of metal that we came to know. I think it started with this album.
Yeah, I was looking up, the research and the two names. Yeah, I think Kill 'Em All turned out to be, the better name. But like you said, with the other title, you knew what you were getting into. And let me just say that the term thrash metal was not coined until 1984, a few years later, or maybe a year later. The magazine Kerrang, a guy in there just, came up with it, and it seemed to fit that sound. A friend of mine, he made the comment, he said they were ahead of their time, and I agreed with him. They were the start of something really new and unique, and I think it's, really what music fans wanted and needed at the time.
That's a good point. And I think that the most historic bands, the most memorable bands, the bands that make their mark in the industry come along at the perfect time. It's a matter of timing. And it's when it has to happen the most. The Beatles came along in a drought for rock and roll. I mean, when Buddy Holly and Ritchie Valens and Big Bopper were killed in a plane crash, that sort of killed rock and roll for a while. It wasn't the same. The Beatles come along and they put their own stamp on it and they sort of reintroduce it, but with their own signature sound. And there's only a few times in the course of music history, really, that you can make that comment that, Elvis came along at the right time. The Beatles came along at the right time. Zeppelin came along at the right time. There was a hole to fill. There was something there that was missing, and the band in question just happened to fill it. They just happened to be, like I said, right place, right time. And that's definitely Metallica. So Kill 'Em All was released on Megaforce Records, and it got up to 155 on Billboard 200 in 1986 and made like no money, basically in the beginning. But something funny happened on the way to not making much money was that the fans started listening and they started picking up on it and in what was termed the underground metal scene at the time. So Metallica starts touring. And of course, when you start touring, especially with fans that already know who you are, they're probably going to follow you from one city to the next if they're financially able to, obviously. But when you go to new towns, you make new fans. And if they dig you enough, they're going to start following you. So initially, it was sort of word of mouth. It's like, hey, man, I saw this great band the other night. You've got to check these guys out. So almost right on top of this, we're talking about Ride the Lightning. And, we're going to kind of zip through this discography here and kind of get your thoughts on this. When you compare Ride the Lightning to Kill 'Em All, do you think Ride the Lightning was a great follow-up? Was it about the same in tone? Was it the logical next chapter? Could it have been a double album because they were similar? Or what's your take on that?
I thought it was a step up from Kill 'Em All. Not that Kill 'Em All wasn't great. It was their first record, and, they were getting their name and their sound out there. But Ride the Lightning, I thought that they improved on everything in this record, this album. And it was a great follow-up to Kill 'Em All. I thought it really enhanced the name Metallica, and more and more fans started to catch on. And that's what you want. You want to get your name out there. And they started, like a sort of an underground, and word of mouth got out. And eventually, kind of like drama, you start slow and you build to a crescendo. And, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And, these guys, they kept going, they kept working at it. And Hetfield will tell you that this is a touring band. That's what they do best. They go out and tour. I think for the Black Album, they probably toured for like 2 years straight, just about. So, yeah, Ride the Lightning, I thought it was a great album. And wasn't their best, in my opinion, but it was, the next step in the evolutionary stage of Metallica.
And you talked about touring band and just putting themselves out there and putting their stuff out there. I mean, Kill 'Em All was 83, Ride the Lightning was 84, Master of Puppets was 86. And I can't say that this is what definitely put them on the radar for me, but this is when I started becoming familiar with Metallica. This is when it started hitting my ear. And I'm not sure why. But I think the song, the title track, Master of Puppets, is what started doing it for me. And dude, if I told you I became a diehard fan at that moment, I'd be lying. I would just say that I heard the song and I kind of dug it. It was cool. So Master of Puppets, at that point, you kind of know, okay, if there was any doubt among anyone from the first two albums that this band was legit, Master of Puppets proved it. And I don't know if anyone felt this way at the time, but looking back on it, I kind of feel like Master of Puppets was the first inclination, at least in my mind, that, you know, this band has the possibility of going mainstream. It was more of an album that someone besides a 16-year-old thrash metal kid headbanging in his mom's, you know, basement. It felt like something more than that. It started to feel like they started to get a little thick around the edges and started getting a little bit more meat to the bone in terms of their sound and their lyrics. What's your opinion on Master?
Well, I can't say that I was into Metallica the time this album came out. It didn't occur until '88, you know, when And Justice for All came out and the video for One. But looking back now, to me, it speaks of the testament to Metallica's staying power, you know, because some bands, they come out with one album, you know, it's really great, their first album, their debut, and it's a hit. Then their second album, you know, is maybe not as good, you know, you're a little disappointed. But Metallica just kept coming out with these, you know, great albums, and, you know, I think, you know, it's just a testament to this band, the staying power for Metallica. You know, you can't argue with their place in history. They've really fought for what they want to get over in this industry. And, you know, things could have gone wrong for them. They could have split up, you know, somewhere in between these albums. And, you know, they still would have had a decent showing, but man, you know, they've really taken it to space, in my opinion.
And, you know, I think it goes back to the point of that they could play and they sound good together. And a lot of bands will stick it through thick and thin, despite the inner problems between the band members, you know, despite girlfriends and this guy drinks too much or smokes too much and he hits on my girl or whatever arguments may be going on inside the band internally. At the end of the day, if the sound is there and if they gel, that sort of becomes more important than anything else. And that might have been what was happening at some point during Metallica. Not that they stayed at odds with each other. I don't know that they did. It's hard to know because none of us were there behind closed doors, right? But even if they had, the fact that they sound so good, the fact that they are clicking on so many levels and understand each other, and, you know, Lars knows to hit the beat right at this second, and James knows when to get there right that second. And they all sort of are on the same page in terms of what they're thinking musically. Dude, that tends to solve all problems, and that tends to cure any issues within the band, because anyone with half a brain in their head in that studio could look at each other and say, wow, this is good. And I think that's what happened with Master, in my opinion. There's not a bad song on that album. Not to me. And Damage Incorporated, I mean, dude, I just... to me, this is one of their better albums. And I can't tell you that, again, at the time that I saw this, this is a masterpiece. I don't know. It did sort of start turning the wheels in my head in terms of this band is a little bit more than what we initially thought. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. And that takes us to the album that is almost to the precipice of that mainstream that we're talking about, and that is 1988's And Justice for All. This was the first Metallica album that really, it may have been the first one I bought, or I may have bought it after the fact. I may have bought it after the Black Album because I was going back to sort of see what this band was about at the time, what they were really about. But And Justice for All was, and you know, we've not talked anything about the covers to these albums, man. And we'd be doing a great disservice to this band had we not mentioned the covers. Some of the coolest covers that you're going to find on any album by any band, I don't care what the genre. And you've got another one here with, you know, Lady, the Justice, you know, she's got the scales and it's sort of, it looks like she's being toppled and destroyed. I mean, another great album cover from this band. What an ingenious bit of artwork, again, to set these guys apart from everybody else.
Yeah, and to add to your point there, Lady Justice is also blind, talking about, the way things were and maybe still are in our country, in our world. It just seems like there's no justice sometimes.
Right.
And the cover, was, I thought it told a really good story there just in the cover. Just from my experience talking about maybe the best Metallica albums of all time, just from my experience listening to friends talk, they'll tell you either Master of Puppets or And Justice for All. And for my money, it's And Justice for All. And, not that I don't love Master, but, I think I like And Justice for All just a little bit more. And, of course, it was my first Metallica album. And, yeah, Jason Newsted, he came on board right before that when they recorded Garage Days Revisited. That was a little, I guess, test to see how he would do, a little screening test for Jason Newsted. And, man, he hit it out of the park, dude. It's almost like after tragic death of Cliff Burton, Jason Newsted came in and picked the ball up, and he ran with it, man. He really gelled with these guys. And when I first saw the band in the video for One, I thought he had been playing with them for years. It's just how good he was, I thought.
And we shouldn't move past Burton because he's an integral part of this story, and he's very important. And I'm sure the band still feels his loss to this very day. I can't say that I remember it making the news on TV at the time. Do you recall seeing like a soundbite or a blurb on a newscast or like a nursepaper, anything at the time about Burton's death?
No, none. I mean, it could be because I just wasn't into Metallica at the time. I had to wait till my teenage years. But, yeah, going back and, looking at this horrible, tragic accident, I really felt a sentiment for the rest of those guys. Kirk Hammett said that it's almost like he lost a big brother that night. He felt like an orphan. Like, what are we going to do? Are we even going to have a band now? That's how integral this guy was. Cliff Burton was that damn good, man. They talked about going back to, possibly the origins of Metallica. Lars Ulrich spoke very highly of Cliff Burton. He and Hetfield both did. They went to see a show of another band, and there was this guy up there just, going nuts on the bass. They said they thought it was a guitar he was playing, just a regular guitar.
Wow.
But they looked at the strings, and it was only 4 strings. So, man, this guy was able to make a bass guitar sound like electric guitar. That's how good he was.
And as a budding musician myself and bass player, I can tell you right now that, a lot of his tabs, a lot of his songs are the ones that I approach very cautiously because I'm only a few years into my playing and I'm nowhere near ready for that. I mean, he was extremely good, very talented guy, and bass players don't get enough recognition. I'm just going to say that now publicly on this show because, that's where my ear immediately goes to in any song, in any genre of music. My ear finds the bass, and it always has, which is one of the reasons why I started playing. But yeah, man, to your point, he is one of the best metal bassists of all time, if not best bassist of all times in rock. I mean, it was he was definitely a master, pun intended. He was definitely a master. And the event that we're talking about, folks, took place on September 27th, 1986. They were in Europe, and it was the Damage Inc. tour. So basically, the members of the band, according to reports, they drew cards to determine what bunks in the tour bus they would sleep in. Burton won and chose to sleep in Kirk Hammett's bunk, which, you can do the math here and say that it would have been Kirk that was dead. So, no one wants to see this happen, obviously, in the first place. But it's one of those deals where, Kirk, I'm sure, has lived with that for a long, long time. And honestly, there was not a lot of serious injuries here in terms of the crash itself. But man, this killed Burton. This killed him. And Hetfield at the time talked about the accident, said that he saw the bus lying right on top of him and his legs were sticking out and he freaked out. And in my opinion, I mean, I don't know if this has been released publicly, but I would say probably it's instantaneous when it happened, which is good if we're being honest. You know, you don't want to think about someone suffering, obviously. But yeah, man, it's at that time, if you're in Metallica, you'd probably think it's over because you've bonded with this guy. He's become a brother to you. You become a family. It's been, and you know, in terms of being in a rock band or any band, I would say rap band or whoever, Run DMC or whoever, you kind of feel like it's you against the world. Well, we're in this together, guys. We've got to, let's go out there and do this. Let's show them what we can do. Let's kill them. Let's leave them for dead, man. Let's do our thing and let's leave them wanting more and wanting an encore. It's us versus them kind of mentality. And I would dare say that that's what was going on with Metallica at the time as well. So yeah, man, you've lost your brother, you've lost your bass player, you've lost your best friend. At that point, Metallica's future was up in the air. And they auditioned several people, supposedly around 40 guys auditioned to take Burton's spot, including Les Claypool of Primus. Now, dude, let's take a second to talk about the guy whose bass lines I will not touch, okay? Maybe not now, maybe not ever, and that's Claypool, because, oh my God, he's a wizard. If Burton was a master, this guy was a wizard on the bass, and still is, right? So imagine Metallica with Les Claypool. Does that freak you out or what?
It does, and I could not have imagined the bassist from Primus being with Metallica. That would have been, yeah, I don't think they could have gone on with him. No offense to him, he's great, but he just didn't fit with the band. And Hetfield knew that. It's like he came in and he's going up and down on the bass like ba 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 ba, and it's like, nah, this is not what we're looking for.
Right.
You know, it's not that you're not talented, but you know, this is not the Metallica way of life here. And it surprised me to know that this guy was a good friend of Kirk Hammett, and that's how he kind of got the audition. So he just came in and did his thing, and they said, nope, you know, sorry, you're not for us. But yeah, just imagine the pressure that you're under to audition for Metallica and try to fill the shoes of Cliff Burton. I mean, yeah, going in, you're a little nervous, but yeah, just to think about that in your head for a second, yeah, you're going to be nervous, of course. And I mean, wow, just to think about that situation, I don't know, I couldn't have done it myself. And to go back to Kirk Hammett talking about the death, you know, that just sent chills down my spine to think about. You know, it was like, well, we drew cards and Cliff got the winning card and he wanted my bunk. And you could just see, I think maybe one of the first times that Kirk's talking about this, you can just see he's tearing up, man. He's getting emotional. And I know this had to scar him to this day, because you can't go through something like that and just shrug it off, man. It sticks with you forever. But talking about taking over the bass position for Metallica, Cliff Burton, yeah, those are some big shoes to fill, and no doubt there's a lot of pressure there. But yeah, a kid stepped up, man. Jason Newsted, he came in, he impressed the band. They thought, well, maybe he's got the stuff. You know, let's see what he's got, and he really fit the bill, in my opinion.
And there's a big difference between the way the fans view things versus the way the people in the actual industry view things. And we've seen that before with pro wrestling. There's the way the fans see it, but then there's the way the guys and the gals see it actually in the business. It's two different things a lot of the time. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. So the fan will see, you know, I love this guy, I like it. And behind the scenes, it's, well, you know, he's not that good, or this guy's great and no one knows it. So I would dare say most of the rock/metal community at that time knew Cliff and knew of him if they didn't know him personally, and said, God, that guy's great. So yeah, dude, to your point, I'm sure there was an intimidation factor going into any audition. But dude, we got to give major credit to Newsted, because I don't know that Metallica would have been any different had Burton lived, in terms of how they made it later to the mainstream. But Newsted seemed to be the perfect fit for this band. And if nothing else, God, those facials that he had. I mean, a lot of what rock is, man, is the presence. Not just the stage show like we were talking about earlier, right? The overall presentation, the production, right? But the presence. I mean, one of the issues that a lot of people have had with the Eagles over the years, they just stand there. The Eagles just stand there. And you can't even tell what they're singing by the looks on their faces because they never move. They never change. And, you know, what a boring concert that must be. Sorry, Eagles fans out there, but I'm not interested. So I want to know that the band is feeling something, that they're into this, that they really want to be here. It's like going to see a stand-up comic. You know when that guy's dialing it in. You know when he's not all there. And you're like, wow, this guy sucks. Like, you know he's a good comic, but he sucks tonight. That's because he probably doesn't want to be there. He doesn't like the town. Someone's ticked him off. You know, he got stiffed on money. Something happened. He's not happy. But you want to feel like that the band that you've paid to see is into this because it puts you more into it as well. And, man, every time you look at Jason's face, dude, he is dialed in. And, you know, he's got that thing that he did when he would go into a circle with his head and he's flinging his hair around and stuff and head banging. And he did that so many times on stage. And I'm like, God, dude, this guy is completely into this. And he's on the not only on the same page, but he might be a step above these guys in terms of I'm not only playing this song, I'm feeling this song through every fiber of my being. Dude, I think he was a perfect replacement for Cliff Burton, no doubt about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wasn't even thinking about, you know, the band projecting the image back to the crowd. You know, they don't want to get up there and just stand around and, you know, be expressionless. They want to make you feel the music. They want to tell a story maybe with their face, kind of like wrestling. You know, when two guys get in there, they want to tell a story. Jason Newsted, he brought some fresh attitude and youth to the band, I thought. And, of course, he had to go through a hazing period. You know, you're not just going to step into Metallica and, you know, be part of the band. They're going to initiate you. And I think I read where they initiated him by tricking him into eating a ball of wasabi. So that's how crazy and insane these guys are. And, you know, they loved it. You know, it's like after, of course, he got over probably whatever the sickness of the nausea of doing that, he probably laughed it off and said, okay, yeah, you know, I'm going to have to earn my stripes. And Newstead, he earned his stripes, man. His time in the band, yeah, he really earned everything that he got. He wasn't going to be Cliff Burton. Nobody was going to match what Cliff Burton did. But Jason Newsted, he became part of the new Metallica, I guess you could say, the new evolution of Metallica, and maybe even kind of changed the other guys in the band. He brought something new to the table. Yeah, it's going to change. You've got a new brother now, and it's going to change you.
Yeah, it's much in the same regard of Bon Scott and Brian Johnson. I mean, Brian wasn't going to replace Bon. He wasn't going to do better than Bon. He wasn't going to improve upon what Bon Scott did with that band. He was going to bring something different, bring something new, bring something fresh, still have the AC/DC sound, but put his own stamp on it. It always felt to me like Brian's version of AC/DC was in his head what AC/DC was. You know what I mean? So, you know, that was never any disrespect to Bon, and the band didn't mean it that way either. And I'm sure that was not what was happening here. The band, Metallica, decided to press forward. And in terms of the fandom of any band we're talking about, you can either get with that or you cannot get with that. It's completely up to you. And I would understand if some fans at the time had an issue with that. Maybe if they still do. I don't know. I mean, I totally get it. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. But like I said, man, I firmly believe he was the best man for the job. And we can't go to the Black Album because that's up next. We can't go there without talking about the Grammy snub, because it was 1989. Metallica gets its first Grammy Award nomination for the album And Justice for All in the category of Best Hard Rock / Metal Performance Vocal. And they were actually standing off stage to accept the award after they did one on stage. Jethro Tull was advised by their manager not to attend the awards ceremony that night because he didn't think they were going to win. He thought Metallica was going to win. So, like, they weren't even there, which may have been good. Because talk about uncomfortable. But, man, I actually remember watching that. And I was like, really? Jethro Tull, they did Aqualung. Like, that's the terrible freaking song, man. Like, oh, dude, what was going through your head when you saw this album?
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Like anybody else, I was shocked with disgust because Metallica had earned it. I think they deserved it, and they just got screwed out of it, man. This was totally wrong in my opinion, and I think everybody else knew, including probably Jethro Tull. Like they were probably surprised. Like, wait a minute, we won? Wow. We thought it was going to be Metallica. Everybody thought it was going to be Metallica,
Right.
And it just it left a bad taste in everybody's mouth. Like especially the band, man, because they're anticipating. They're backstage. They're ready to go on and accept the award, and this is going to be the biggest moment in their career up to this point. And this got snubbed. And at the time, I remember talking to friends the next day at school and like thinking, man, did you see that? That was horrible. Jethro Tull. And when I heard the name of the band, I thought it was just a guy with, some other musicians.
Right.
And he had just used his name because, it just sounds like what was going on. And I was thinking, Jethro Tull, that sounds like a country band to me. How are they nominated for a hard rock heavy metal, award? So just sometimes the Grammys don't do the right thing. I don't know what it is, politics backstage, but I think, to me, this was kind of them saying, no, we're not ready for Metallica. They haven't changed the sound enough yet. You come back in a few years, guys, and we'll talk.
I think Hetfield, since he is a country western fan, right, and they've done songs that have that sound, I think he probably would have been okay with that at the time. He's like, hey, well, at least we lost a band I like. But Jethro Tull was avant-garde, experimental. They were more of a, talk about a play. They were more of like, I don't know, like a theater production of a rock band or something, which was, and a bad theater production at that. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever disagreed with that point over the years. And here's what I'll tell you. I met a lot of Metallica fans in my time. Never met a Jethro Tull fan, and that's the truth. So I found it funny that after the fact, when they did win their first Grammy, the first thing Lars said was, we'd like to thank Jethro Tull for not putting out an album this year. So that was good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. That was a great moment for Metallica and everybody. Everybody got a real good chuckle out of that. To me, that was a shot at the Grammys, and they deserved it. They knew that Metallica should have won that time, but for some reason, maybe whether it was politics or what, they snubbed them, and all was well in the end, of course, eventually.
This is another example of, kids, why the Grammys are a joke. I'm sorry. You can't be a rock and roll fan and watch the Grammys in 2020. Good luck, because it's garbage. It's just it is so, and I hate the word commercial, dude, because people have been accusing Christmas of being commercial since like the 1500s or something. It's too commercial this year with all the stockings and whatnot. They're calling it a Christmas tree. Well, that's commercial. I mean, it's an easy word to throw around, but God, are the Grammys nothing but, they're just nothing but pomp and circumstance. And they at this point, they cater to another audience. They don't cater to the broader audience like MTV used to do back in the day. I mean, dude, you remember MTV? Maybe one day we'll do an MTV episode. That might be fun. Because in the beginning, MTV was awesome. It was all rock. And when rap came around, I was like, damn, I kind of like this. This is fun. Run DMC was fun. And it was, even when rap got a little bit harder, I was still into it. Yo MTV Raps was a fun show. And I was getting exposed to music that I'd never heard before, right? Dude, MTV was awesome. But then, enter the sponsors, enter more money, enter more people to please. You've got more bosses to make happy. You got to play this. Oh, you shouldn't play that. And you got to play this. Record label wants you to do this. And now MTV is a shell of what it used to be. And that's why I take such a massive crap on the Grammys, because they deserve it. There's just so much garbage on that show. And, they put up AC/DC on that show a few years ago, and Unexpected, and they did 2 songs. And to their credit, a lot of the people in the audience who were fellow musicians were headbanging and were really getting into it. And then others in their tuxes and their eyeglasses and their prim and proper haircuts were barely clapping their hands. And I'm like, I get it if it's not your thing. I guess I understand. But show a little bit of respect here, because these guys have done everything in this business, and they've made a lot more people happy than probably you will. and they will be remembered for years to come, and you probably won't. So show a little bit of respect. So there's my rant, kids, on the Grammys. You're welcome.
Yeah. It's so ironic. And justice for all, there's no justice with the Grammys. Yeah, like you said, too commercialized. There's too many bosses there saying yes, no, no, no. Too many no's, and maybe yes every once in a while. It's kind of like Vince McMahon with WWE. No, no, no. This is what I want you to say. No, you're not going to do that.
Right.
Yeah, it's too controlled and too commercialized. And just to sum it up, I never watch the Grammys anymore. I just don't waste my time.
Yeah, me neither. I just can't. It's just too hard to watch. So we're finally here, and we're not ending the show here because there's a lot more to talk about, right? We'll get there. But this is the big one. In October of 1990, Metallica enters one-on-one recording studio in North Hollywood to record its next album. Bob Rock, who had worked with Aerosmith, The Cult, Bon Jovi, and Motley Crue, was hired as a producer. Let's stop right there. Bob Rock, legend in this business. Aerosmith, The Cult. Very underrated rock band, by the way, Greg. I'm a huge Cult fan. Love those guys. Bon Jovi and Motley Crue. This is the guy that helmed the biggest hits that these bands had. And he comes into the studio to work with Metallica. Now, you kind of know if it's Bob Rock, he's going to, and dude, people use the word mainstream like it's a bad thing. I don't necessarily think the word mainstream is bad at all. But I guess it depends on what the situation is, right? But man, this is the album that really turned on the rest of the world. As if people didn't already know who this band was. One opened the door. Let's be honest. One opened the door. And the Black Album kicked that door down. Because suddenly you could picture this band doing a lot more things, being in a lot more places, being invited to play in a lot more places. And again, the red carpet was rolled out for them. And I think it's well deserved. Dude, you have the perspective of being, and you may not have been, boots on the ground from day one with the first album. I get it. But you were an old school metal guy. So tell me what's your opinion on the Black Album as a whole? Are you more of the mindset that it was evolution for them, obviously the next step, or was it more like, man, these guys really wanted to get paid. I can't believe they did this. Where do you fall on that?
Oh, no. I was there with them for the Black Album. I didn't run away from Metallica. I didn't turn my back on them. When the Black Album came out, I immediately went out and got it because I had seen the video for Enter Sandman, and I was on board, man. This, to me, it wasn't much of a change to their sound, in my opinion. I was still on board. I was still a Metallica fan, and they were my band at the time, so I was right there with them. And yeah, I got the Black Album. I wore it out, man. Well, actually, at the time, I was still playing tapes, cassette tapes. So I guess I wore the tape out. I probably, how you could sometimes the cassette tape, the little film would get wrapped up around the tape player, and
of course
it would, yeah. And you'd pull it out, and you'd be like, man, So I probably did that with this album because I loved it so much. Man, I just kept listening. And, I was like, man, this is really good. I like the sound. I mean, yeah, they've got a couple of songs on there that, really not, traditional Metallica sound. Unforgiven and Nothing Else Matters. But, it's like, again, you have to kind of change with the times, So, yeah, at the time, their sound was, going through a change. And, it kind of surprised me at first, but I kept listening and, it grew on me. At the time, Lars kind of jokingly mentioned the fact that James Hetfield had been listening to Chris Isaak's one hit called Wicked Game, and that's where he got the inspiration for these two songs on the album. And I thought it really worked. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going outside the boundaries that you're used to. Like I said, life is about change sometimes, and sometimes that change is good. And I think that's what this was. This was a good change. Working with Bob Rock, who had worked with, these other great bands in the industry, it just really opened up things for Metallica, and it's a whole new world, whole new horizon, in my opinion.
And like you said, Wicked Game inspired Nothing Else Matters. And dude, we've made the point on the show before. Musicianship recognizes musicianship. Okay, when you're good, you're good, and I think it's a great point to make, especially in this bit of discussion, is the fact that you can be from two different walks of life, be from two different genres of music, but you respect when the guy is good, and I think that's what we had here. Was a common respect between Hetfield and Isaac, where it's like, man, this is good stuff. I like this. I'm gonna borrow this. And let's be honest, some of the biggest hits ever have been borrowed from someone else in terms of the tone or the idea, or maybe one verse inspired a whole album. I mean, we've seen it multiple times over the years. So we're talking about Bob Rock, and like you said, man, he worked with these bands. And again, this is me putting words into the conversation that may never were spoken. But in my opinion, I would believe at some point Bob Rock would have had the conversation with this band if they didn't say it to each other. What kind of band do you want to be? What is it you want to do here? Because, we want to do the Metallica sound, obviously. But do you want to take it the next step, or do you want to do what you've been doing? And I don't know if it even needed to be said, because this album, in my opinion, is the next logical step in the evolution of Metallica. And I felt that way then. I feel that way now. And dude, when you look at these songs, okay, we start off with Enter Sandman, and we may have to do a deep dive on the Black Album one of these days, man. I'd be totally down for that. I think that would be a fun show.
Yeah, me too. I'm ready for that, anytime you are, Tom.
So we kick off with Enter Sandman, no doubt. We kick off with Enter Sandman, and honestly, one of the first bass lines I learned was Enter Sandman. And man, it took me a while to get it, but once I got it, I'm like, okay, now I feel like I'm a bass player. Which at the time I had the instrument in my hand for a month or so, and I wasn't anything yet. Now it's a little bit different, right? But at the time I was still such a novice at this. But man, this song opened the floodgates, didn't it?
Yeah, I want to tell a really cool story. Of course we all know this, but I feel like it has to be said. This bass line was played in an Alice in Chains Unplugged show, but at the time, maybe not everybody, really recognized it. But you listen to it in between songs. Jerry Cantrell, or actually Lane Staley, starts off by saying, "Okay, we're gonna break to an LL Cool J song," and next thing you know, you hear that Enter Sandman bass line, and of course everybody erupts, and that probably people that know what they're doing, they get a big laugh out of it. And I didn't know that Metallica was in the audience at the time. You told me that later on, and I thought that made it so much cooler. But it was a little joke, to their buddies Metallica in the audience.
Yeah, and I love that story actually, and it does kind of pose the question: was Enter Sandman too commercial? I don't know. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this because we've kind of already covered it here, but I don't know. It's more approachable. It's more radio friendly. It's more, you can snap your fingers to it. You know what I mean? You can get into the groove of the song. You can bang your head to it, obviously. I mean, it does kind of feel more like it's for fans of all ages and for audiences of all kinds versus, a thrash speed metal song from one of their previous albums that's really, really fast. I mean, this kind of feels more like this is socially acceptable metal, which may not be the best term, but do you see where I'm coming from? Is that how you view this song? Is like being, it's funny they kicked the album off with this, with Sandman, kicks the album off. Cause like, is that a statement? Like, okay, here's who we are now, right?
Yeah. I thought it was a great way to kick the album off. Just almost like Welcome to the Jungle for Guns N' Roses, which we've already covered. But yeah, this is a great way to make a statement for your kind of your new sound. But I think it was a great mixture of old Metallica and new Metallica. Actually, I think it was a great mixture of old Metallica and new Metallica, and it was something good for everybody, like you said. And they wanted to broaden their horizons and open themselves up to, a wider audience. And I think they achieved that with this album. And yeah, like I said, I didn't turn my back on them at this point. I never turned my back on Metallica. It's just I stuck with them. Even though when they changed their sound drastically, I stuck with them even when they changed their sound really drastically after this album. And, like I said, it was a great album, and it really, it's probably Metallica's best album, but for me personally, I go back to And Justice for All as my favorite.
Yeah, I think this album will be regarded as maybe their best of all time. In the grand scheme of things, at the end of the day, I think this will be the one that they are maybe remembered for is the wrong term, the wrong phrase, but it would have to be up there because this is the one that really broke open the floodgates for them. And dude, you got Sandman, you got Sad But True, you got Unforgiven, Wherever I May Roam, Don't Tread on Me, Nothing Else Matters. Wow. I mean, just some of the biggest hits this band's ever had has been on this album. And, this is still one of my favorite albums of all time. I can put this album on, just like Appetite. I can put on Appetite anytime, right? And we made the statement in that episode in particular that, you got to kind of know where you're at before you turn it up way too loud. But, the Black Album's a little bit different because there's not a lot of, foul things going on in the lyrics, right? It's just more of a feel-good metal album, which is kind of an odd thing to say. Like, this is a feel-good metal album. But, honestly, that's what it was. If we're talking about commercial, and trust me, kids, we could spend all day on the Black Album. There's no doubt about it. Dude, if we're talking about commercial, and this is the sticking point for a lot of fans, if you thought it was before, it really is now, because this is when the haircuts happen. Load and Reload, which probably could have been released as a double album at some point because it would have made a lot of sense. Reload sound like a continuation of Load to me in my ear. Dude, this is when the haircuts happened and the word mainstream started getting used like crazy. And it almost feels like the Black Album they looked at was, okay, we kicked the door down, now let's just go full throttle. We've already got one foot in the pool, might as well jump in. I mean, I think they lost fans with this. I don't know that they cared, and I don't know that it mattered long term. It probably doesn't. Let's be honest. They're one of the biggest bands of all time, right? But I would dare say they lost some of their fan base with Load and Reload. What's your first reaction to Load and Reload?
Well, I remember when I went out and got the CD and I was looking through the sleeve, you kind of like to look, see where the band's at that time, maybe read the lyrics. And the first thing that struck me, like a lightning bolt, they had cut their hair. And I was like, my eyeballs jumped out. And I was like, wait, Is this Metallica? And here's another surprise. They were laughing. I'd never seen this before with Metallica because they were always angry. They were always brooding. And this was a new Metallica and, for a new day. And it really surprised me and it shocked me. And I was like, okay, I'm a little hesitant to listen here, but I'm going to listen. And I had to admit, when I first heard it, I really wasn't into it, but the more I listened, I was like, okay, I can get into this. It's not really a change going out in the left field for Metallica. They've still retained a little bit of their old sound. They've just, incorporated some new stuff in there. Like you said, they've gone more mainstream. And yes, I'm sure they lost a lot of fans, but they didn't lose me. I was still listening at the time. I didn't turn my back on them, as I said. And, it's just, I think it was sorry. And I just think it was good for the band at the time because, I guess they were ready for a change. They were at that point where in their lives they had matured. They weren't angry anymore. They wanted to kind of move on. And these were the two albums that helped Metallica move on and try something new. There's nothing wrong with trying something new in life. Everybody does it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I think this worked in some ways, and in some ways it didn't. But for old school Metallica fans, sorry, it happens. Move on. If you didn't like them, you didn't have to support the band on these albums. You didn't have to trash them. You didn't have to say, well, this sucks. Metallica, you sold out. Yes, they did sell out. Jason Newsted said we sold out. We sold out arenas all over the country, all over the world. So yeah. I think this is what the band really wanted, long-term agenda. They wanted to reach a wider audience, and they did.
Great point. I love the fact that you mentioned that little soundbite from Newsted. That's great stuff, because I remember seeing it at the time. I'm like, okay, that's awesome. And, you mentioned the fact that they were laughing. and smiling. Rich people tend to laugh, Greg. I mean, that's just, you know. And at this point, I'm sure Metallica's pretty wealthy. I'm sure they're much wealthier now. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of natural evolution, natural progression, you could argue that point all day long. We kind of have here. But I think the Black Album opened the door, and Load and Reload, you know, hang on. I think the Black Album really did it for them, but I think Load and Reload sort of cemented the fact that, okay, we're a different band now. This is something new. And, of course, we go from that to Garage Inc., which I think was just more for them than the fans, if I'm being honest. It was something they really wanted to do to sort of cite their influences in music, which I think is perfectly fine. They did this major concert, the S&M, which is something that we had never seen from these guys before, performing with an orchestra. It was epic. It was monstrous. It was something massive. I mean, they're the biggest band in the world at this time, I believe. And, you know, talk about what it's like to hear your favorite Metallica songs accompanied by this orchestra playing behind it. I mean, that's, wow, man, what a different thing that was for them, and what a change of pace for this band, man. It was great, but it was much different. This was, in my opinion, this was the Led Zeppelin part of this band that felt like, okay, this is something more than just a rock band. This is a gigantic production here.
Yeah, great analogy. Led Zeppelin. Talk about broadening your horizons. You know, Metallica accepted the invitation to have an orchestra come and play with them. It was something I never anticipated at all. It was a good surprise because sometimes you like to hear stuff like that. You know, it goes against the grain, not traditional Metallica. And I thought it turned out really well. The people from the symphony worked really well with Metallica on that set. And, you know, of course, it really told a story. It's kind of like some of those songs make me think, I don't know, that one song, the way it begins, it makes me think of like the Christmas story, you know, the night before Christmas. I don't know why, but it's always made me think of that. And those guys, they were on point. You know, everything went off without a hitch. Everything was perfect in that show.
Yeah, it was. It definitely gave you the feeling that you were at a Metallica concert without actually having to be there. I mean, that was the cool thing to me. And yeah, it was different, and it was a new approach to a familiar favorite. It was something, like we said, a breath of fresh air in terms of these songs. It was, you know, you can listen to your favorite song 500 times in the course of a week. And I know you have too. So upon, you know, listening to it for the 501st time, what keeps you sticking around is the meat of the song. So when you get that song with something different with it, with a new flavor, a new taste, you either gravitate to it or you hate it. But I thought S&M was fun, and I love the different approach they took to the songs. And honestly, this is a band, dude, that has embraced who they are. They embraced their future. They're the ones that determined where they were going to go. They didn't leave it up to the record label. They didn't leave it up to the moronic Grammy people who didn't know what they were doing at the time, and still don't, honestly. They didn't leave it up to sponsors or corporations. They decided for themselves what they were going to do, and they did it. And that's an American story if I've ever heard one. You've got a goal in mind. Back from the moment that Lars posted that ad. I mean, you've got a goal, you know what you want to do, then you go out and make it happen. I mean, you know, you hit the ground running and you do everything you can. You put in the work. If nothing else, this band has put in the work to get to where they are. And we know what happens after Load and Reload. And we know what happens with Garage Inc. and S&M. We know about the documentary, Some Kind of Monster, which leads directly into Saint Anger. And Saint Anger is another departure. It's another costume change for this band. Another wardrobe change. The fact that Saint Anger had no guitar riffs because they were trying something different. I'm like, this is the point where they started to lose me, if I'm being honest with you. I wasn't into this at all. And I give them respect for trying something different. I mean, it reminds me of Joe Satriani, who tried an album called Inches of Creation, which was like a techno guitar album. Hated it. Still hate it. There's some great riffs on there, some beautiful music. I didn't want to hear programmed guitar from Joe Satriani. I just want to hear him, you know, killing it. I want to hear him destroying the guitar and destroying a song, because that's what he's good at. as I said before, I called him a genius because he is, but I don't want to hear that stuff coming out of a computer. You know what I mean? And to me, that's what Saint Anger kind of was. It was like, okay, this might be too far of a departure. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm like you, Tom. When this came out, I remember we were talking about it, and you said, man, I can't even tap my toe to this. I don't think I'd heard it yet, and you were just kind of, bracing me for it. So when I heard it, I was like, man, you're right, dude. And it sounds like Lars is banging on a trash can lid. To me, I don't know, that or a trash can or a trash can lid. And I didn't like this album at all. I didn't go get it after I heard the song, and I think they did a video for it. And not that I hated Metallica. This wasn't my album from Metallica. As I said before, sometimes change is good. Sometimes this change is not so good. And this was one of those times for me that, I said, well, I can't support Metallica here. I still love the band. They're trying something new, different, but this is not the Metallica that I want to listen to. I stood with them on Load and Reload, but yeah, I couldn't go any further with Saint Anger.
Yeah, same here. And we know what happens here. Newsted leaves the band, replaced by Robert Trujillo, and that was the subject of a lot of what was going on in Some Kind of Monster. And, just that you see the band sort of, I don't want to say the words falling apart, but as we said earlier in this episode, folks, the bad habits are coming to light. Hetfield's got a lot of issues going on here. Got to get himself right. This band's got to get itself right. If they're going to continue on with Trujillo or anyone else, they got to get themselves right. And thankfully for us, they did. I think Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self-Destruct are two very, very good albums. I see both albums as being, if we believe that the Black Album was a mix of old and new Metallica, then I would say that these two albums were definitely more of a statement. I mean, I think you could have followed up the Black Album with Death Magnetic and Hardwired to Self-Destruct, and it would have been fine. Not that I didn't like Load and Reload, I did, but I think you could have followed the Black Album with these two back to back, and it would have been, yeah, this is still Metallica. This is still what I love. And again, maybe not fair to them in terms of, yeah, but we had a lot of stuff going on in the meantime. And we don't want to overlook Load and Reload. I don't want to, because I love King Nothing. I can't play it yet. I want to. Oh my God, it's an amazing song. And that's one of those songs I will turn up and make my ears bleed every day and twice on Sunday, because it's just so phenomenal. So I don't want to leave out anything they did in the meantime, but I love Magnetic and Self-Destruct. I love both these albums. And when I heard there was a new Metallica album on the way, I got excited until I found out it was S&M 2. And it was just reworks of the old songs with the orchestra. And I'm like, I want to like this, but I want a new album. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to lie to you, man. I'm a little let down by that. But talk to me about the last two albums, man. Where do you stand on those two?
Yeah, I think it was a good call back to their roots, the early days of Metallica. I mean, with kind of a new touch to it. Robert Trujillo, I thought he came in and filled that void very nicely. I mean, he's been a guy that's been around the industry for many years as well.
Yes.
He was originally in Suicidal Tendencies, very good for that band. And then I think he played with Jerry Cantrell on his second solo album, Degradation Trip, and you could really hear the improvement from Jerry Cantrell's first solo project to that one, because he was working with two great musicians. I think the drummer from Faith No More worked with him on that. So, I mean, yeah, Cantrell, he said he would really have liked to have kept Trujillo, but, at the time he was playing with Ozzy. And I think it's ironic that Trujillo and Jason Newsted kind of switched places there eventually. Trujillo took Jason Newsted's place in Metallica, then Newsted went to eventually play with Ozzy. That, to me, that was kind of ironic, and I like Death Magnetic and Hardwired. I think they were two good albums, good comebacks from Saint Anger, and I think it put Metallica back where they wanted to be. They got in a better frame of mind, and they started making music that they wanted to make again for themselves. To put them back in that kind of category where, yeah, okay, this is Metallica again. Yeah, I'm back with you guys. I'm ready to listen. Come out with another album. I'm there, man.
Absolutely, and I couldn't have said any better, man. They really did come back. They've come full circle, I believe. And look, at the end of the day, this is still one of the biggest bands on earth. They've sold so many records. They won so many awards. They've made such an impact in so many people's lives. And, you know, their stuff is never going to be forgotten by the fans. It's left an imprint, an indelible imprint for bands for years to come to follow their lead and to follow their example. And as a dude, I kicked off this show talking about that sound. That's what made me a fan. It's what continues to make me a fan is they never lost that sound. They are metal, period. There's nothing else. There's no way else to describe this band except they're metal. I mean, that's what they are. And I don't think anyone does any better. This is one of those subjects, man, that we could do like a 2-part or 3-part, 4-part on and still not cover everything we want to say about this band. But in the end, as always, I'll get your final comments. What's your last word on Metallica?
Metallica, they captured my heart and imagination back in '88. That's when I first fell in love with this band. And it kind of wavered with Saint Anger a little bit there. But yeah, I came back. This is one of the greatest metal bands, rock and roll bands, whatever you want to call it, whatever genre you want to say. This is one of the greatest bands ever. They definitely made a mark on the music industry, and they'll be forever remembered. I think it's just a great story. This band, their lives, what they went through. They came from, you know, rags to riches, you know, nothing to being one of the biggest and wealthiest bands ever. And to me, Metallica is not just a name. It's something else, man. I don't know what it is, but it's something else. It's out of this world. And yeah, I look forward to their next venture, whatever happens in the future. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what these guys can come up with, what they can create. I know that the next Metallica album is probably going to try to pay tribute to its predecessor, and they're just going to continue to go on and make music. I think that's what they want to do. They just want to make music. It's their lives, and it's become everyone else's life. You got on board with Metallica years ago. You stuck with them through thick and thin. As if you did like I did, you know, it's just an awesome story. And I was just watching a documentary the other day at work, and man, it came time for me to get up, but I didn't want to. I wanted to stay there at the computer and finish watching this documentary. And I think it was the same for my friends. You know, that we were all glued. Nobody was saying a word. We were just watching. And to me, Metallica, they're great, man. They're awesome, and I love the band. They're one of my favorite bands of all time. They'll be forever remembered as one of the greatest rock bands of all time.
Like GNR, like the Beatles, obviously the Beatles, like a lot of other bands, Metallica is in the soundtrack to my life. They have a definite place there. And I can remember back to key moments in my life, things that were going on, relationships, environments, people, faces, places, names, that kind of thing. And Metallica is part of the soundtrack. And those are things that I'll never forget. For better or worse, they're with me. They're part of who I am. And this band is part of who I am. And I'm sure, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that this band has heard this very story from so many thousands of fans over the years. And I'm sure they'll continue to hear it, you know, for the rest of all time. Because as far as I'm concerned, I want to see this band continue to go. They're still as good today as they ever was, if not better. And I love the fact that they're still touring. I love the fact they're still playing, and I hope they never stop because, as Greg said, they're considered one of the best of all time, and I echo that sentiment. And that is Metallica. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.